Hello and welcome to Psychology in Seattle. I'm your host, Kirk Honda, licensed therapist. Please like us on Facebook. Please subscribe to us on iTunes and review us on iTunes. You can send emails to us at contact@psychologyinseattle.com. That's contact@psychologyinseattle.com. We always love hearing from our listeners. Please keep the ship afloat by donating at psychologyinseattle.com. You can go to our website and click on the donate button. Let's see, what else can you do? Today's music is provided by a crappy band that I'm in called the Shameless Plugs. The band called Bread Knife Incident. The band is called Bread Knife Incident, not called Shameless Plug. That was just a joke. So that's Bread Knife Incident. You can support the show by getting our music on iTunes, I suppose. And you can support us by telling friends about us, particularly if they're in the field. A student of mine who listens to the podcast wrote me a question a long time ago. I think it was, maybe 6 months ago, and I'm just now getting around to it. And he wrote, "As an aspiring counselor, it seems that this career is more restricting on my social life for ethical reasons than many other careers. Is being a counselor as restricting in reality as they make it sound in ethics class? Will I be constantly running away from clients and friends of clients in social situations?" This is a good question. It's a common question, and I'll start off by saying that I'm not an ethics expert. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a therapist who has taken a lot of continuing education on ethics, but this isn't my forte, and I don't spend a lot of time thinking and reading about it. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, please. And this is one of those areas that if I do talk about on the podcast, I always tread pretty lightly and walk on eggshells, because the consequences for me giving advice and for you to follow it and to do something wrong is quite high. So take my credentials into consideration. There are things that I would claim to be an expert on, and this is not one of those things. But every therapist has to understand, to some extent, their ethical codes and the laws. And I've spent time trying to understand that, and so this is my understanding. Let's start off by defining what ethical code or dilemma this has to do with. First off, there are two ethical consideration categories that come to mind when I think about this question. One is client confidentiality, and the second is multiple relationships. Client confidentiality is supposed to be upheld. So I'm going to hypothesize a situation to make this discussion a little bit more grounded in a real situation. Let's do two different situations. Let's do you as a therapist run into a client at the grocery store. And the second situation is you run into a client at a party, say at a Christmas party or a holiday party, at a friend's house, not at work, but at a friend's house. In the situation where you run into clients if you ran into a client at the grocery store, it's important to uphold confidentiality, meaning that you don't want to reveal to anyone in the public that you know the client. Because say you see a client in the grocery store and you say, "Hello, Joe, how are you?" Well, if anyone around you happens to see that interaction and happens to know that you're a therapist, then they might suspect that that is a client. When clients enter therapy, there are certain things that need to be told to clients, and they call that disclosures to clients. And so therapists will have disclosure statements that clients will sign. And on my disclosure statement that I give to clients, and every therapist has a different disclosure statement, mine says, due to something along the lines, I don't have it in front of me, but it says something along the lines of, due to ethical codes and laws regarding your right to confidentiality, I cannot and will not acknowledge you in public. If you say hi, I will match your greeting with a hi, but I will not introduce myself or indicate how I know you, although you are free to do so if you want. So I have that in my disclosure statement, and I'll often tell clients in the first session about that. Basically because I don't want to put a client off if I do see them in public. I don't want them to think that I'm purposely being rude to them. I want them to know that I'm ignoring them because I want to protect their confidentiality. And in my experience, in the times that I have run into clients in public, they just ignore me. They just ignore my existence, and I don't have to acknowledge them, because I'll look at them thinking, are they going to say hello? What should I do? There's always a little bit of discomfort, and usually they'll just ignore me. They just won't acknowledge that I'm there. And sometimes I think that clients are uncomfortable because they forget the rule and they don't remember what they're supposed to do. They just know that they're potentially not supposed to say hello, and so I think they just avoid it altogether. Although I do run into clients sometimes and they'll say hello to me and I'll say hello back. And, it can be a nice moment. If I'm with someone, they'll say, who was that? Was that a client? Because friends that are with me will notice that there's something weird about the hello, and they'll say, hey, was that a client? And I'll make up something. I'll say, oh no, that's just someone I work with. Because if I said, oh, I can't tell you, I can't say anything, then my friends will immediately know that it's a client, right? So sometimes I believe that it's an ethical responsibility to lie to people about things. Someone says, is that a client? You have to say, if you say, I can't tell you, then you are saying yes, right? I mean, what other situation would there be where you say, I can't say? Another situation that comes to mind where you might lie to be ethical is when, for instance, you're in a case consultation and a colleague of yours is presenting on a case, and you realize that the case they're presenting is someone that you know. Ethically, we are supposed to recuse ourselves. We're supposed to either ask the person to present someone else, or we're supposed to not stay in the room. Sometimes it's more ethical actually to just sit through the presentation without standing up and walking out, because if you stand up and walk out, then people will know that you know this person, and that is potentially an ethical violation for the client, if that makes any sense. Because now the client's identity might be revealed to the people who you're consulting to. It gets confusing, because essentially when you're consulting a case with some consultants, you usually try to mask the client's identity to some extent. And if a therapist walks out of the room saying, I know this person, then that is an identifying piece of information that might further identify the client to these people that are consulting, if that makes any sense. So sometimes it's better just to sit there in the room and sit through the presentation so as to not indicate who this client is to the other people. But in this situation, I'm saying that sometimes the best thing to do is to lie and say, oh, I feel sick, I got to go home. And if you're pretty convincing, then you've done an ethical thing in that instance, because you've avoided having to sit through a presentation about someone that you know, and you've also avoided indicating to everyone else that you know this person. So sometimes lying is a good idea. I don't know what lawyers would say about that, honestly, but to me it seems right. In a situation where you're at say a holiday party and you run into a client that you didn't expect to be there, you walk into the party as a therapist and you're there at the party, and then suddenly you realize that one of your current clients is there at the party too. There are two different things to think about. One is client confidentiality, and the second one is a multiple relationship. So in terms of client confidentiality, it's pretty cut and dry. We cannot, as therapists, reveal client information to the public, to anyone other than the client, unless the situation is very specific, and I won't go into all the different nuances there. But essentially, when you walk into a party and you see a client, if you were to say, oh, hello, how are you doing, client Joe? Well, at that point, you have now announced to the entire party that that person is a client, and you've broken confidentiality. You've now revealed to everyone that Joe is in therapy. Even just saying hello to the person or acknowledging that you know the person might be breaking confidentiality. For instance, if you see Joe across the room and you acknowledge that you know him, then people might surmise that this is a client. They know you are a therapist, presumably, or they might come to find that you're a therapist. And if you acknowledge that you know someone from a previous encounter, they might guess that this is a client, and that is breaking client confidentiality. So that's pretty cut and dry at that point. So regarding that ethical concern, it is possible to go into a party, a holiday party, see a client, not acknowledge that you know the client, not interact with the client doesn't interact with you, and confidentiality is not broken. If you don't interact with that person, you don't indicate you know that person, the client doesn't approach you, there's no ethical concern regarding confidentiality. I suppose one could say that people might notice that you're trying to avoid that person, and they might guess that this person is a client, in which case that would be a breach in confidentiality, but that's kind of a stretch. So that's a pretty cut and dry discussion about client confidentiality when running into a client, say, at a party. However, the multiple relationship ethical concern is much more nuanced. It's much more weird. And when I talk with students about this and supervisees, they get quite upset because there's no clear-cut rule. And I think what people do is they end up making a rule out of it because it's so ambiguous and because there's so many things to consider and it's so confusing. And therapists really aren't geared to thinking this way in general. They end up just making this rule and they say, well, it's wrong to be at a party with a client. You'll hear people say that. If you asked the average therapist, my guess, if you asked them, what do you do if you see a client at a party? They would say, you turn around and go home automatically. And you'd say, well, why do you do that? They say, well, it's unethical. And then you might ask them, why is it unethical? And they'll say, well, it just is. It's wrong to do that to a client. And I'm potentially making a straw man here at this point, but in my experience, when I talk to people, they tend to do that. And I'm guilty of that too. It's just one of those things about being a therapist. We concentrate a lot on how to help clients, how to heal them, but we don't spend a lot of our time poring over ethical manuals and case law and state law and all this sort of stuff. So because we're just not lawyers, we're not really interested in that so much. And so we tend to have the cliff notes of ethics. And one of the boiled down cliff notes is you turn around and go home. But the truth of the matter is that it's much more nuanced than that. For instance, you could stay at the party and even socialize with your client at that point and make an argument that it's not unethical. And so let me explain. So first off, these sorts of relationships used to be called dual relationships, but they've become known as multiple relationships because you can have more than two different relationships with a client, for instance. And by relationships, they mean you have a therapeutic relationship with a client, meaning you are therapist-client, and that is one relationship. And when you walk into the party, now you are suddenly social event participant relationships people, if that makes any sense. It's sort of a weird way of putting it, and I think this is another reason why therapists don't like talking about this sort of thing, because it has some lingo to it. But you have a therapist-client relationship, and as soon as you walk into that party, whether you like it or not, now you have a party member relationship with that person. So it's multiple relationship. You have two different relationships with this person. And so whenever you enter into a multiple relationship, you have to think about various different things and you have to ask certain questions. Now, I'll say from the get-go, if you forget all the different questions and you are unaware of the different considerations, then you probably should just turn around and go home. And incidentally, just to cut to the chase, that's what I would do, is I would turn around and go home in all likelihood, especially if it was a current client. If it was a client that I had 5-10 years ago, I don't know if I would. It depends on the client, honestly. And this has never happened to me before, so I don't know exactly what I would do. It also depends on the kind of party. If it was the sort of party that I was with my close friends and I was apt to be very relaxed and loose, then I probably would go home. If it was a party with a bunch of people that I barely knew and I knew that I wouldn't let my hair down, so to speak, I probably, or I don't know what I'd do, but I might stay just because I know that I wouldn't reveal too much about myself. But anyway, so multiple relationships can take a multitude of forms. So in addition to the therapist-client relationship, you can enter into a personal or friendship relationship with clients. There are multiple relationships that involve social interactions, which is what this party involves. Sometimes people enter into business relationships with their clients. Sometimes you end up in a collegial relationship with a client. For instance, if a client of mine decided to go to my university and be a student at the university, at that point, I would be in a multiple relationship with that person. I would be a therapist-client relationship with that person, and I would be in a relationship in which we were colleagues. And so that's an example of a collegial relationship. So there are various other kinds of multiple relationships, like your client could go to your church, for instance. Let's say you attend this church and you've been going there for 40 years. You suddenly realize that your client goes to the same church. Well, are you going to never go to that church again? Are you going to tell your client you can't come to this church? It's sort of a sticky situation. So at that point, you're in a multiple relationship with that person. And one of the things that often doesn't get discussed in multiple relationship discussions is that if we were to walk away from every ethical red flag, we would never socialize. We would never leave the house. We deserve to have a life. For instance, in that example with the church, that person that attended that church for 40 years deserves to stay at that church if they want to. And that's something to take into consideration, even when it might cause risk of client harm. There are some multiple relationships that are flat out unethical. For instance, having sex with a client, dating a client romantically. These multiple relationships are never ethical. In fact, they might even be illegal. So there are some examples of multiple relationships that are forbidden. Another thing to consider when thinking about multiple relationships is that some therapists can argue well that a multiple relationship might actually help a client in the end, and that it's worth taking the risk for the benefit of the client. For instance, let's see if I can think of something off the top of my head. Let's say a therapist is a cognitive behavioral therapist and they're working with a client, and the client-therapist relationship is not heavy, if that makes any sense. The client isn't sensitive to learning about information in the therapist's life. Let's say that the client is terrified of applying for a job, for instance, and is debilitated because of that and can't find work. And the therapist is working with him on his anxiety regarding applying for a job. And let's say that they're in a small town and this client is not qualified for very many jobs. And the client goes for a year without being able to find a job. And then the therapist hears about, say, from his cousin, that his cousin has a business and is looking for someone to hire. And the client would be a perfect fit for that. The therapist might suggest to the client to interview with his cousin, and then the therapist might get a release of information from the client to talk to his cousin. And then the therapist talks to his cousin and says, look, give this person a chance. I think he would be an excellent employee, but he gets really nervous in interviews and ends up never getting the job because of his anxiety. But if you just give him a chance, he'll be fine. And then he talks to his cousin, and his cousin says, okay, I'll give him a chance. And he interviews the guy, gives him a chance, and the client ends up being a wonderful employee at this cousin's business. Well, does that benefit the client? Yes, right? You could definitely see the benefit there. Well, that's a multiple relationship. The therapist has a therapist-client relationship with the client and now has the other relationship of, the therapist saying, this is my cousin's employee. And now the client is talking with his boss, and the boss says, oh, my cousin, your therapist, when he was young, he was so crazy, he drank a lot, and da-da-da-da-da. So those are some of the reasons why people avoid multiple relationships, is because clients might hear information about you as a therapist, and that might make therapy difficult. But if you're a cognitive behavioral therapist and you're fairly pragmatic about your therapy, you might not care if your client knows that about you, and it might not actually harm the therapy. So that's another consideration. Also, in some communities where there are very few people, like a rural community, it is unavoidable to have multiple relationships with your clients. If you live in a town of, say, 500 people and you're the one therapist and you have a client, well, the chance of running into your client in a social situation is very high. For instance, if you go to a wedding and the town only has 500 people, then there's a high likelihood that your client is going to be a guest in that wedding, right? Or that there might be one church. If you attend church, then you're going to run into your client. So whenever ethical considerations are being considered, the size of the community is always taken into account. Seattle is a fairly large city, but it's small enough that multiple relationships are perhaps more common than if you practiced in New York City, for instance. And that is considered when evaluating whether or not the risk is worth taking. So again, getting back to our example of walking into a party and your client is there, one of the questions that you want to ask yourself as a therapist is there a power problem in this situation? Is there a power differential between you and the client? If, for instance, you enter into a multiple relationship and you are the client's boss, you are in power over that client. Well, this is a potential problem and a harm to the client and the therapy, because you are now able to fire the client. You're able to tell the client what to do. And this is a complicating factor to the therapy. For instance, if a client is talking with you about their issues with abuse, for instance, and then you hire a client as a painter for your house, and let's say the client doesn't do a good job. Well, now you're in this position where you're in this dilemma where you either have to accept a bad paint job on your house, or you have to reprimand this contractor who happens to also be your client, and the client might actually forever see you differently and be hurt by that interaction and never be able to recover, and therefore the therapy suffers. So power is one thing. That's just an example that comes to mind. There's probably better examples, but anyway. Another question to ask when entering a multiple relationship is the duration. How long will the multiple relationship last? In this example at the party, it's not likely to last very long, especially if you're only there for an hour or something. In the example of being the employee of a client for painting your house, you're going to be involved with that person, say, for a week. I don't know how long it takes to paint a house. So duration is something to consider. It doesn't mean that if a multiple relationship is longer, therefore you're supposed to not have it. It just means this is one of those things you need to think about. Another thing to think about is whether or not the ending of the multiple relationship is known at the beginning of the relationship. For instance, in the party example, you pretty much know that when you walk into the party and you see your client, as soon as one of you leaves the party, that particular type of multiple relationship is likely to be over. I guess unless you think you might run into them at another party. But in terms of that, just that one interaction, that multiple relationship has a finite time span. Whereas in that example of the cousin hiring your client, well, you and your cousin are going to be cousins for forever, and the client might work for your cousin for decades, but you don't know that. He might only work there for a week. He might work there for 10 years. You don't know. And so that's another thing to consider when entering into a multiple relationship. Again, just because you don't know the ending date of the multiple relationship, that doesn't mean that you're not supposed to have it, but it's something that makes it more concerning. Another question to consider when entering into a multiple relationship with a client in a party situation, a holiday party situation, is this particular client susceptible to jumping to conclusions that might lead to them being hurt? For instance, let's say you have a client who is very attached to you and very much wants to be your friend, and you know that that's not ethical and just not possible or appropriate. And you, as a therapist, are often telling the client, look, I'm really sorry, but it's not appropriate for me to be friends with you. I can't hang out with you outside of therapy. And it's something that you've talked about. And let's say you see this client at a party and you know that they're going to take this opportunity to become perhaps confused about that. Well, that is a big reason to turn around and go home. Whereas if you have a client that, say, you've seen 10 sessions and it's been mostly around, say, I don't know, job-related issues, like they're thinking about changing their job and it's been fairly superficial in terms of what they've talked about in therapy, and you see them and you don't think that they're susceptible to being hurt if, for instance, at the party they come up to you and say, hey, let's go fishing sometime, and you're like, actually, I'm really sorry, but I can't really do that for ethical reasons. I'm really sorry. And you predict that the client isn't going to be significantly hurt by that, then, that's another thing to think about. Incidentally, I'll just say that whenever any of these things come up for me, I start off by telling clients, look, I'm really sorry. This is going to sound very rude because frankly, it is rude, but I'm forced by my ethical codes and the laws to do this. I can't do X, Y, and Z with you. The reason why I have that disclaimer with my clients when I run into this is because they have no idea. I think a lot of therapists think, well, doesn't everyone know that I'm not supposed to be friends with clients? No, I'm going to tell you that not everyone knows that. It's kind of a weird situation. For instance, if, let's say you had a tennis coach and you said, hey, let's hang out after our tennis lesson. Let's go get a beer. And you would expect that the tennis coach would be able to do that, right? Well, clients don't necessarily see us as any different than that. They might, but they might not. So if they ask those questions, it shouldn't be seen as some kind of egregious act on behalf of the client. They might just not know. And so it's only fair to say to clients, look, I'm really sorry. This is going to sound rude, because it is rude, but I have to say no to that because of my ethical codes. I know that they're strange codes, but those are the codes that we have. Other questions to consider if you were to run into a client at a party would be, can the therapist obtain their objectivity, so to speak, regarding the client if they enter into this multiple relationship? For instance, using our party example, let's say the therapist walks into the party and decides to stay and sees a side of the client that they haven't seen before, and that's probably likely, right? And they see the client, let's say, being very hostile to people around him. The client starts a fight with, that's a good example. Let's say the client starts a fight with the therapist's friend. So the therapist has a friend named Jane, and the client, Joe, punches Jane in the face. Joe gets drunk and punches Jane in the face. And the therapist sees it and is very concerned about it and begins to hate Joe because the therapist has now seen Joe do something that is horrible to the therapist's friend, Jane. So this might lead to the therapist losing objectivity. Now, the word objectivity is problematic in a postmodern world because there is no such thing. But anyway, would that situation change the therapist's feelings toward the client in such a way that the therapist would not be able to be compassionate toward that client anymore? That's something to think about. A more precise question might be to ask, is staying at the party going to compromise the client's goals in therapy? So whatever the client's goals are in therapy, and sometimes clients don't have very distinct goals, so we have to think about that. But will staying at the party compromise those goals for the client? Because if they will, then it is by definition unethical because you are interfering with the care of the client. Also, another thing to consider is, let's say you see the client and you gasp and suddenly turn and run out of the party. Now, everyone at the party might see you do that and might think, why did he do that? Why did he just turn around and walk out of the party? Oh, he must have saw a client. Who here is his client? Oh, maybe it's Joe. Joe is his client. So that's another thing to consider is how you excuse yourself, right? Or whether or not you excuse yourself at all. If say it's your birthday party and you show up to it's a surprise birthday party, and you say, I have to leave, and you don't explain why, people are going to think, why in the world would this person leave? Now, in that situation, you might want to fib and say, I'm sick, or this sort of thing to protect the client. Something to consider is including this sort of situation in your disclosure statement. One of the things that therapists are required to do is inform people at the beginning of therapy what might happen in therapy. If I see you at a social function like a party, this or that might happen. Another question is, will you lose your cool at the party, like you get too drunk or someone makes you angry and you, fly off the handle or something, and the client sees that side of you and will compromise their respect of you. Part of being in therapy for some therapists, for some theoretical orientations, is that the client is supposed to respect their therapist. Now, I don't know how much therapists actually talk about that explicitly, but I would say that my style of therapy is such that I want my clients to respect me. I want them to think that I'm a stand-up individual, I suppose. And I suppose if they saw me at my worst, that they might lose respect for me. And that is a potential harm to the therapy. I don't think I've ever put that into words. I'm going to have to give that one more thought because I'm not quite sure about that one. But I don't know. That's off the top of my head. Another question is that, will the client now avoid those people at the party for fear of running into you? Are they afraid of running into you with those people, so they just cut off that entire section of their social group? Or will the client now avoid those people for fear of putting you in an ethical dilemma? So say you're at the party and you see the client and you say, oh, I got to go, and you run out, and the client knows that because they were there, you had to run out of the party. So in that situation, if you predict that the client might be overly sensitive to your feelings, and perhaps a little bit of sensitivity is fine, but say they take it really, really hard and they feel extremely shameful about putting you in that situation and it's a harm to the client, then if you predict that, then maybe at the party, if you were going to excuse yourself, you would just say something like, oh, I don't really feel well. It has nothing to do with you. It just had to do with I just didn't feel well and I was done with the party. I just wanted to go home. Something else to consider in a situation like this is you should document this multiple relationship in the client file just in case something happens. And if you get anxiety about documenting that contact with that client at the party and you think, oh, I don't want this in the client file, then again, you should turn around and go home. Now, you should still document that happened, that you ran into them at a party and you went home. But if you're afraid that this information is going to become permanent, then again, you should go home, because you should be documenting this sort of thing. And your guilt or the red flags that are going off in your mind about documenting it should be an indication of its problematic nature. And perhaps the most important question to ask is, what is this going to do to the relationship with the client? Let's say you stay at the party and you don't indicate that you know your client. So everyone at the party has no idea that this is your client. They have no idea that Joe is your client. And let's say that one of your friends comes up to you and says, man, how are your clients today? Were they crazy as usual? Well, you might not have prompted that response from your friend, or you might have, because, say you complain about work sometimes to your friends, which everyone does, or a lot of people do anyway. Well, if your client overhears that, they are going to be hurt. That is going to hurt their feelings, and that is going to damage the relationship, maybe permanently. I mean, imagine if you were in therapy and you overheard that sort of conversation happening. You would feel foolish. It would really, really hurt. So we can't predict whether or not that would happen. And you can't go around telling everyone, hey, don't talk about my clients or don't talk about my work or whatever, because again, you can't indicate to everyone that this is your client. Now, the chance of that happening, I don't know, it doesn't seem very likely, but it could happen. And I can't rattle off a billion examples, which I'm sure there are, in terms of what could happen that would damage the relationship with a client. And this is another reason why you shouldn't talk poorly about your work or your clients to people, because if it gets around to your client, then that is extremely harmful to the relationship in all likelihood. For instance, let's say you tell your mom about how there's this one client that just drives you nuts, and she is really clingy, and she's really, I don't know, just all these judgmental things, and you don't manifest those feelings when you're with the client and you're helpful and you're doing your best, but you have a lot of negative things to say, and you're letting it all out to your mom. Well, let's say, I don't know, your mom tells someone at her work that, oh, well, my son's a therapist, and boy, but he was telling me about this one client he had, and how frustrating this client was, and just how clingy this client was to him. And this person sounds just awful. Well, let's just say there's on the off chance that a client of yours overhears that, whether it's a past client or a present client, or even a future client for that matter, right? They overhear you vicariously talking about this. This is a problem. So it doesn't mean that we can't vent and we can't get support, but there's a way of doing it, and there's certain people that might be more trusted, and maybe your mom's very trustworthy. I'm not saying that moms aren't trustworthy, but those are just things to consider. In general, it's a good idea to just not talk about your clients or your work with people other than your supervisors and your consultants, just for this very reason. There are even some ethical codes in some professions that say that it's unethical to ever talk about your work, to ever talk about your clients, unless there's a very good reason to do so, like educating students or interns or something, or getting supervision or consultation. So in some circles, it's unethical just to even mention anything about any client, even if there's no way that the audience would be able to identify the client. And while I'm on the subject, I'll also just say that having a positive attitude about our clients is important. I think that if you find yourself very jaded about your clients, then maybe rethinking your approach to your clients. I don't know. Maybe you're burnt out. Maybe you don't like the job, or maybe this one particular client is very hostile towards you. And in that case, I don't know what to say exactly. But if you find yourself in general complaining about your clients and saying judgmental things about them to people, or thinking those kinds of thoughts, then I would really think about what your approach is to your work. I personally find it easy to be compassionate toward my clients. I tend to look on the bright side with them. And I think most therapists are like that, honestly. The therapists that I know are like that. This profession tends to attract people that are like that, right? But I have heard some people have attitudes like this about clients, and it really does make me cringe. Because even though the client can't hear the judgmental statements, it just hurts. It hurts to think about a client giving over a lot of trust to their therapist, and then their therapist turns around and judges them or disparages them somehow. It just, I don't know, makes me sad. One of the things that I often tell my students when they watch videos is to be very compassionate about the clients in the video, because sometimes I find that students will laugh at them or will become judgmental about them or will make snarky comments about the things that they're seeing. And what I say is imagine yourself being a client in therapy. Hopefully it's not hard for you to do that. And imagine that they're filming it. Imagine that 20 people in a room are watching it and they're sneering at you. That is not a good feeling, right? So we should always be respectful of people when they're in therapy. It's a vulnerable thing. It's not easy, and everyone has problems, and everyone has dark corners, and everyone has, shall we say, embarrassing characteristics that a room of people would laugh at. And us therapists should not be laughing at that. So we should be respectful of those people that have volunteered their lives up to us for education. We should be respectful of that. My interpretation of students, or really anyone laughing at this sort of thing, is that they're projecting their own anxieties onto the screen. And everyone has a bit, if not a large amount, of insecurity. And when a client is on screen, there's a certain amount of anxiety that is produced, I think, and I think people react to that. And other things to consider are, once a client is a client, we're supposed to consider them always a client, even if it's 10 years later and you haven't seen them in 10 years, they've terminated. They're still a client. So now there's some ethical codes and laws that have some sort of time limit to this, but some people might say that it's a good idea just to think of clients as always clients, because they might always come back to you as a client 10 years later. I've had clients 10 years later come back to me. So once a client, always a client. I think that's a pretty good rule to follow. And in response to my student's question, I think that when you take ethics class, you are told about all these horror stories, and you're told that you're not supposed to do these things, and there's ethical codes around these things. And I think a tendency in a class like that is to become extremely rigid about the rules, because a teacher doesn't want to get up there in ethics class and say, well, it really just depends on what you want to do. It's up to you to interpret the rules. So I think educational systems try to err on the side of caution and safety, which is probably a good thing. But the side effect of that is students become paranoid right out of the gates. Ethics is one of the first classes that they take as they're going through their training programs. And invariably, they become paranoid about doing anything because, they hear about all these horror stories and there's all these rules. There are so many rules to keep track of. It's amazing. And the rules don't make any sense. For instance, once in a continuing education class about ethics and legal issues, I heard about a case once where a therapist was seeing a teenager, a girl, a teenage girl, a young woman, and she was using cocaine. Well, she was over 13 and so therefore has the right to confidentiality. And the therapist was concerned for her safety to some extent because she was using cocaine, but he didn't break confidentiality because he knew that that's not reason enough to break confidentiality. Let's say he told her parents, look, she's using cocaine. I'm really concerned. That client, the 17-year-old client, could turn around and sue the therapist for breaking confidentiality. But what ended up happening was the teenage girl OD'd on cocaine and died, and it came out that the therapist knew about the cocaine use, and the parents sued the therapist for not telling the parents about the cocaine use, and the therapist was successfully sued against, I don't know how to say it, but the therapist lost the legal case. So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And I tell students that sometimes what ends up happening is they end up getting even more worried. But my hope in the end is that they realize that no matter what they do, they can't control for everything. And sometimes you get yourself into a jam and there's no way out. You'll get sued, and maybe you did everything right and you consulted with everyone and you did everything you're supposed to do, and you still lose the case. I mean, how many times have you heard in the news about a case that goes strange, where you think, how did the judge or the jury come to that conclusion? Well, that happens to therapists too. I think we have this false notion that somehow if you just know the rules and you follow them, then everything's going to be okay. And it's just not the case. You just have to do your best and hope for the best. And if something bad happens, then something bad happens. Anyway, so it's not very comforting, I know, but another ambiguity within the ethics and within the ethical codes and the laws is I am mandated as a therapist by the RCW, the Revised Code of Washington, I think. Wait,
Revised Codes of Washington. I don't know. It's RCW. It's the laws of Washington State. I'm not a lawyer. I don't even know how to talk about this sort of thing. But anyway, we call them the RCWs. Anyway, I'm mandated by the RCW to report accounts of abuse and neglect on children and vulnerable adults to CPS, Child Protective Service, whenever I hear about it. However, APA ethical codes state that I don't have to report when I hear things when I'm off duty. It doesn't say anything about that in the RCW, but APA ethical codes say that I don't have to report things if I'm off duty. Well, what constitutes being off duty exactly? So that's a bit of a gray area. Now, another ethical code that I follow is the AAMFT, American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy. Well, their codes do not comment on being on or off duty. So if I were, for instance, to hear about child abuse and neglect while I was at the grocery store and I'm off duty in terms of what I would define as being off duty, am I mandated to report it? I don't know. The RCW says I'm supposed to report it and doesn't indicate on or off duty. APA says you don't have to report it if you're off duty, and the AAMFT doesn't even comment on it. So I don't know what to do. I would guess that I don't have to, but maybe I do. I don't know. It's weird. Another ambiguous code and law is I'm mandated to report accounts of abuse and neglect on children and vulnerable adults to CPS, Child Protective Services, even if they happened decades prior. So if I hear about someone telling me that they were sexually abused as a child and they're now a 50-year-old person, there's nothing in the mandated reporting laws that says there's a statute of limitations or anything, or that if it happened a certain amount of years ago, you don't report it. It just says you're supposed to report every indication of any abuse and neglect. So I've asked around and people say, well, it's open to interpretation. Most CPS caseworkers interpret this to mean this law to mean, so they interpret. So the CPS caseworkers are interpreting this law, and they interpret it to mean that the perpetrator has to have current access to victims. And if so, then you report the abuse even if it happened years ago. So say a client, 50-year-old client tells me she was sexually abused by her uncle when she was 10. If I asked her, well, tell me about your uncle. Where does your uncle live? Does your uncle live around children? Is your uncle even alive? Say she says, well, my uncle's dead now. Do I report it or do I not? There's nothing in the laws that say anything about you don't have to report it if the perpetrator is deceased. There's nothing that says that. So am I supposed to report it or not? And honestly, it's a situation we hear a lot about in therapy. An adult client will come in telling us about abuse and neglect that they experience as children. It's a common issue that brings people into therapy. And honestly, it's a common issue anyway for people. And if we were mandated to report all those incidents, I imagine that CPS would be, all they'd be doing would be taking calls from therapists telling them about sexual abuse and physical abuse and neglect that happened 40 years ago. I heard at a presentation by a CPS worker recently that the reporting law does not apply to childhood sexual abuse and neglect if it is discovered after the child has become an adult. So the CPS worker was saying that the reporting law, even though I haven't seen it in the law stated as such, she said that the reporting law does not apply to abuse that has happened once the victim has become an adult. What does that mean? So does that mean if an 18-year-old says, I was sexually abused when I was 17, does that mean I don't report it? I mean, according to the CPS worker at this presentation I saw just last month, she said, according to her, I don't report it. But that seems a little weird to me. It seems like if an 18-year-old tells me she was, for instance, raped by her father a year ago when she was 17, it seems like I should report that, right? So it gets weird. But I'll also say that CPS worker said that if there's reasonable cause to believe that other children may be at risk, then we are required to report it. So just there on the simple law of mandated reporting, it gets squishy sometimes. And I've run into this many, many times, I have to say. In general, I like to protect client confidentiality. I don't like to break it. I don't like to tell other people about what my clients tell me. But on the other hand, I would not be able to sleep at night if I thought that I could do something to make a difference in the world to reduce the likelihood of someone being abused. It's just a moral issue at that point, right? So in conclusion, you should know your ethical codes and your state laws. And if you're unsure about anything, you should always consult with someone who knows about this sort of thing and document that conversation just in case. Because sometimes if you get in trouble, you can refer to the consultation, what was discussed in the consultation, and that can save you to some extent. Not as a way of getting out of trouble, but as a way of demonstrating that you did the necessary amount of consultation and thinking about it. And sometimes that's sufficient in terms of letting you off the hook, so to speak. We're not lawyers. Therapists are not lawyers. It's one of the things that I often see students and therapists struggling with is they're upset because there's all these laws and there's all these contradictions and there's all these things to think about, and they forget them. And then when something comes up, they're angry at the world because they have forgotten the rule and the law, and they get frustrated. And so what happens to a lot of therapists is they just freeze. They don't do anything. They don't consult because they're ashamed, or they're too worried about highlighting some aspect of their practice, and so they just isolate themselves, and then they get in trouble because they were afraid of asking around. And it's just completely unreasonable that as therapists, with all the things that we are charged with, with all the things that we put our effort into in terms of client care, it's too unreasonable to expect us to remember all these random codes and laws. Plus, we're not geared toward that. We're tree hugger kind of people. We're squishy people who like to hug people and care about people. We're not the sort of people that are really oriented toward rules and regulations. Now, I'm generalizing, of course. Actually, as I was saying that sentence, I realized that I know some therapists that are extremely rule-oriented and can recite the regulations off the top of their head. They're like an encyclopedia in that way, so I'm generalizing. But if you're one of those therapists that are like me, that have a difficult time remembering all this stuff, it's, just don't expect that you will. You'll never remember all of it. But you should know enough to know when there's a red flag. And when you have a red flag, then you should talk to somebody or look it up. Honestly, the RCWs, the laws are online usually. They are in Washington, and the ethical codes are definitely online. And if you went to school, then you definitely should have a book on ethics. And if you have a license, then you are supposed to get continuing education. Probably, my guess is that part of that education at continuing ed is supposed to be in legal issues and ethics. So pay attention in those classes. And one last issue for the soapbox. Remember that fundamentally, we are charged with providing confidentiality to help clients feel safe to talk with us about anything. I've run into students and other therapists that have been eager to tattle on their clients. And I remind them that it is our duty to protect client confidentiality unless we have no other choice. For instance, I sometimes hear students saying they are contemplating telling the police about a crime a client committed, like a robbery or something. And I'm aghast at their eagerness to break confidentiality. I think it's because they think, well, isn't it immoral to allow a criminal to get away with it? And yeah, I guess that is sort of a dilemma. But our profession is set up so that clients can tell us stuff like that without worrying that we're going to tell on them. In order for all clients to trust us, they have to have this understanding that in order for us to break their confidentiality, they have to tell us very specific information that forces us to break that confidentiality. And I'm not going into all the different reasons why we would break confidentiality, because that would take too long to talk about, because there are many, but they're rare. And if a client tells us that they robbed a 7-Eleven, it's actually unethical for us to tell the police. I know that might sound strange and perhaps slightly immoral to let someone get away with that, but in order for people to trust us, in order for the general public to trust us, we have to follow certain ethical codes, and one of them has to do with confidentiality. Clients have told me about various criminal activities, honestly. I'm not a police officer. I'm a therapist. It's a very different job. I'm not an enforcer of the law. So why am I telling you this? I don't know. I'm just telling you this because if you're one of those people who has an urge to tell on your clients when they tell you about a crime that they committed, just know that that is actually against, in all likelihood, your ethical codes, depending on your jurisdiction and your professional ethical codes that you follow. Now, if the client says that they're going to kill someone, then you have a ethical and legal obligation and moral obligation to protect life and to call the police and tell them, look, I have a client who I believe is at imminent risk of killing somebody, and here's that information. So there's that. But if they say they already have done something, or they say they're going to punch someone in the face or something, then we're supposed to uphold confidentiality. And honestly, as a therapist, I have not run into this very often. I have not had clients tell me about murders, and I can't recall any situations where that's happened. It's pretty rare that I've had a client tell me that they are going to harm somebody. Usually, if I do hear that, if a client does tell me, it's usually an exaggeration. Like they're saying, oh, I'm going to whip that person. I'm going to kick their ass. And then I ask them more specifically about whether or not they're actually going to do it. And they say, no, it's just an expression. I don't think I'm actually going to do anything. And again, I will just add the disclaimer again that I am not an expert in ethics, and this is not my area, so take everything that I'm saying with a grain of salt. I'm just telling you what I do from my own experience and the way that I've interpreted things. And honestly, if I ran into any red flag areas, in all likelihood, I would consult with someone that I consider to be an expert. I have colleagues of mine that have written books on these subjects and know much, much more than I do. So if I run into a red flag, then I would consult with them, and I have.
So to answer the student's question, will I be constantly running away from clients and from friends of clients in social situations? I say the answer is, well, it really just depends. I mean, it's, as you can see, there's so many things to consider. And if you consider them, then you have options.
All right, let's go on to news.
I'm Mandy, Kirk's cousin.
And I'm Humberto Castañeda. I am the voice of the Lorax.
Voice of the Lorax? Isn't that Louis De Palma?
That's not what they told me.
Oh, what'd they tell you?
They told me I would be the voice of the Lorax when they make the movie next year.
The movie has already come out. I'm sorry to tell you.
This is the independent release.
It's the live action version.
Yeah, it's a live action. But wait, if it's live action, why am I the voice?
Because, well, they didn't want
They didn't want me to be on camera. Oh.
Please like us on Facebook. Please subscribe to us on iTunes. And please donate by going to Psychology in Seattle and clicking on the donate button. We are trying to raise enough money so that we can go to the Penis Festival in Japan. Berto, didn't you find out recently how many people are coming to our website?
I did find out some numbers that were interesting.
Mm-hmm. Is it more than one? I'm hoping it's more than one.
Yeah, no. So we have well over 1,000 unique visitors over the last year.
Okay.
And the thing is that the number could actually be as high as 9,000, but it's hard to estimate. So the conservative number is closer to 1,000 or 2,000.
So it seems like we have about 1,000 loyal listeners.
That's right. And in terms of total visits, we had 71,000 visits last year.
But I have to say, compared to other podcasts that I listen to, this is like 0.1%.
It's small potatoes.
It's very small potatoes. We're a very small podcast.
We're a niche.
but we appreciate
topic.
every visit that we get.
We do.
Yes,
So
they're
thanks,
like
everybody.
Yeah.
Tell your friends about us.
Yeah. It just means that you have to donate a lot more.
And hey, sponsors, man, you call me.
Yeah. We have 1,000 people listening.
Right.
What countries are they from?
They're from over 70 countries. Most of the visits are from the U.S., Canada, Germany, Australia, Great Britain, Taiwan, Sweden, and Spain. Then we'll have one or two unique visitors or hits from like random countries. Like I think I saw in there
Luxembourg?
What's Luxembourg? Is that a country? No. But there was like several South American countries.
Can you say the South American countries with your Latin flavor?
Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina.
Is that how you say it? Brazil?
Not Bara, but Brazil.
Brazil.
Sí. Costa Rica.
Hey, we like that.
We should have a new segment.
Berto talks in Spanish.
Let's say something. Say something.
Berto's phone sex voice.
No.
I'm liking it.
We should do it. Sexy voice with an unsexy sentence. Like
We should have him read something on sexy in a sexy voice. Like the directions on the back of a suppository.
Okay, this Pepsi Max can read something on this, but
In Spanish.
yeah, like not a significant source of other nutrients.
No, in English, in your sexy Spanish.
But in English it sounds like this.
No,
Right.
in your Spanish accent English.
I can't do a Spanish accent.
You did. Oh, you know.
No, senor, it doesn't come out right. So here's my English lame version. Not a significant source of other nutrients. Now the Spanish version. No es una fuente significante de otros nutrientes.
See?
God, say it again.
I didn't even say it right, but that's okay.
I'll never fucking know. I don't care. Just keep talking.
All right, we'll have a new segment.
That's a new segment. What should we call it? Unsexy sentence. Spoken sexy. No.
Unsexy sentence spoken sexily. The easiest title ever.
Yeah. All right. News.
News. Okay.
What is in the news, Umberto?
It turns out that primitive consciousness emerges first as you awaken from anesthesia.
Primitive consciousness emerges first.
I'm not that surprised by it. What really starts lighting up first, it's the more primitive brain structure.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me either. When I've woken up out of anesthesia, I am not processing the world very well.
Right.
I mean, I can't think straight. I don't know what's going on, but I know that I'm awake.
Whether it's surprising or not, they confirmed that those are the areas that start lighting up first.
So that's the reptilian brain that wakes up. So do we start hissing like a snake when we wake up?
That was V, the final battle.
Are you talking about the 80s V?
Yeah, the original.
Yeah.
The OG.
Yeah. You probably don't know this because you weren't born yet. What year were you born? 86?
You said 95.
Yeah. In a different episode, I said 95 you were born.
85, thank you.
News.
All right, news. So,
Oh, I have a theory about 1985. It is when many good things happened.
Oh, yeah.
A great year for music, great year for movies, great year for guitar amps. Lots of great things happened in 85, including you being born, Mandy.
word.
Oh, yeah. There's exceptions to every rule. She's giving me the dagger eyes.
Can you say that in Spanish?
Me das los ojos de cuchillo. But cuchillo is weird. Like cuchillo, that sounds dirty.
That one didn't go so
That one
well.
didn't go.
No.
I'm still mad.
Ojos de espada. That's a little better.
How about you were born in a good year, Mandy?
Tú naciste en un año muy bueno.
I forgive you. Call me. All right, so news. Oh my gosh, you guys are going to have to tell me what you think about this. So there was a couple in the Netherlands, husband and wife, who found out the husband's got no sperms because sperms is invisibles and they could not make babies. And so they're like, oh, we don't really want to take sperm donor because, you know, they wouldn't share any genes biologically speaking. And the dad or the father the soon-to-be father of the whatever baby didn't have any brothers. So his father offered to donate his sperm
Soap opera.
to make the baby with his, I guess, daughter-in-law's egg.
Oh, how dirty.
So this father-to-son sperm donation would have a father who was a biological half-brother and a grandfather who was his biological father.
Weird.
Am I blowing your mind? The father,
Right.
the one who raises him, is actually his half-brother.
Right.
That's right.
And his grandfather is actually his dad.
And his mother is his sister-in-law.
They talked about it, and they decided everybody was consenting, and they went ahead and they did it.
Did he get to have sex with her?
Oh, God. We're just going to move on. Anyway, crazy story, right?
How do you feel about that? Would you do that?
Would I take my father-in-law's sperm to make a baby if my husband couldn't make a baby? No.
Why did it have to be him again? I missed that part.
Because there was no brother.
But why does it have to be the same?
They wanted...
But your dad,
Oh, the genetic.
but your dad isn't a twin of you.
They wanted enough of the family genes.
Right. They wanted... I don't know why that part was, but I was just like, this is... Weird.
All right, tough or bluff. The Japanese term for silent but deadly translates as one cheek sneak. Tough or bluff. The Japanese term for silent but deadly translates as one cheek sneak.
One cheek sneak. Well, I'm going to go tough.
Okay.
That sounds crazy enough to work.
I'm going to say tough because that's ridiculous.
It's bluff. It's actually transparent fart.
Transparent.
All right.
Are farts not transparent normally?
By the way, I have a new app on my iPhone. Perhaps you've heard of it. It's called...
Oh my gosh. What is this? 2005?
Stop.
This is great. This is a segment? Is this what we're doing? Is this what these fine people are paying for?
God.
Donate, please. Donate.
I swear. Oh my God.
No, and the worst part is that our listeners at home don't realize he's not using an app at all.
Oh my God.
It comes in all flavors.
Wait, you have got to tell me later what that app is called. Oh my God. That's...
It's just called Fart.
I fart.
Did you pay for that?
No.
Oh, just push a button and it has a bunch of squeaky wet farts.
Does it have microtransactions? You can download additional farts.
You can upload your own farts.
Oh, great.
Get out.
I think it's actually all uploaded farts.
Oh my God.
Get
I mean, some of them sound obviously like they were recorded on a toilet. You can hear that reverberation.
Oh,
Let's
jeez,
just
dude.
stop.
Tough or bluff?
That's gross. Okay, so Star Wars, you're familiar with TIE fighters. Okay?
What?
Yeah.
I've heard of it.
That's capital TIE. The tougher bluff statement is it stands for Third Intergalactic Empire.
Interesting.
Because it's capitalized TIE.
Yeah, I'll go tough.
I'll go bluff. I think they had no idea what it stood for. They just call it a TIE fighter.
That's bluff. But you know what it does stand for?
What does it stand for?
Twin ion
Oh,
engines.
I knew that.
You guys are a disappointment.
No, you're right. We are, because I knew that when I was a kid. I had a TIE fighter, and I knew all these things.
When I came home after watching Star Wars when I was 6 years old, all I drew was TIE fighters.
Well, you should have known that stood for twin ion engines.
But I especially liked the Darth Vader TIE fighter, which was the curvy wing one.
His was black.
All right, Godzilla. Has anyone here heard of Gojira or Godzilla? Mm-hmm. All right, he has a weight. He weighed 20,000 tons.
Okay.
That is Godzilla's weight. Tough or bluff?
I have no idea how to even begin to quantify.
So to give you an
this.
idea, 1 ton is a small car, like a tiny little car. So like 20,000 cars. That's Godzilla.
No. Bluff.
Is it higher or lower?
He doesn't know. No.
It's the size of a building, and he's radioactive.
Does that add to his weight?
I don't know.
No.
I don't
Yeah,
think.
yeah, because if he has heavy elements in.
Bluff, I think he weighs less.
I'll say bluff. I think he weighs more.
Ultimately, I think Honda is right and Mandy's wrong. The truth is, the weight is listed as 20,000 to 60,000 tons. Since I said 20,000, which is the lowest end of the scale, I think this should go to Honda. But it's definitely not less. Think how huge he is.
But she still got it right. She said bluff.
Oh, fine.
All right, tough or bluff? In the original script, Lando was supposed to be jealous of Han and Leia's relationship. Tough or bluff? In the original script, Lando was supposed to be jealous of Han and Leia's relationship.
Tough.
That sounds plausible. Tough.
Bluff. It was Chewie who was supposed to be jealous.
Ew.
Yeah.
He's got a wife and kid back home on his planet. Remember the Christmas special?
Yeah, you've seen it.
No, I wish I hadn't.
His kid is named Itchy.
Is that his name?
Yeah.
Isn't he kind of like Chaka?
Yeah.
He wanted to get up all on Leia.
Yeah.
And lay her.
And here's how you know that George Lucas wrote each movie as he was making them. When Princess Leia kisses Luke Skywalker in Empire, it's clear that they were not supposed to be brother and sister. Spoiler alert.
I don't know.
I know. There's no way. If the writers were like, later on we're going to reveal that this
That
is
makes
brother
it
and
all the
sister.
more interesting.
Disgusting is what it makes it.
Interesting. It wasn't a kiss
Hey.
in the well.
Because
it was a peck.
because the original trio, it was Han, Luke, and Leia, and there was supposed to be sexual tension between Luke and Leia.
Yeah, of course, it's natural.
You wouldn't do that if you had the idea in your head that they were brother and sister.
Okay, so would it be weird if Han had no sperm and Luke offered to father Leia's baby and it'd be his brother's son?
Yeah.
it could
what if
happen.
Yoda? What if Yoda offered?
It could happen.
I saw what movie did I see last night? I saw Wrath of the Titans.
you did?
At the Boeing IMAX. It's actually not horrible.
Okay.
It's not great. I wouldn't recommend seeing it, honestly. But they stole the line from Empire Strikes Back. Perseus says to his son, "I love you," and his son says,
I know.
"That's right."
You say. That sucks. Really?
Yeah.
What?
It was really obviously a ripoff of Empire Strikes Back.
But it's 2 guys, 2 dudes,
Yeah.
father and son.
Father, son, yeah. Anyway, tough or bluff?
Is your iPhone cover really Hello Kitty?
Maybe.
It looks like it.
It's a pretty adorable thing.
It makes it look like a little Hello Kitty book.
Isn't
Yeah.
it super cute? I just want to read it all day and make it fart.
Transparent farts.
One cheek sneak.
But Hello Kitty would be like,
Yeah, Hello Kitty does not fart.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of farts and reverberations off toilets, we're back to Guinness Book of Records. The most toilet seats broken by someone's head in 60 seconds was 32. Tough or bluff?
toilet seats?
I'm assuming wooden toilet seats, like
Okay, and how many? 32?
32 in 1 minute.
I think you could do slightly more than 32, so I'm going to say bluff.
Yeah, me too.
You think more?
I think
I'm
more.
saying 40.
40.
I'm going to say 55.
Whoa.
Whoa. Okay. You both are correct. It's bluff. The correct amount of toilet seats broken by someone's head in 1 minute was 46.
Oh, wait.
So
was in between
you. But like that's a random hobby, or somebody caused themselves a lot of minor brain damage to break toilet seats. Even if you did that just once, think of the concussive head trauma.
All right. Our friend Kirk Honda over here.
Kirkland Honda.
Yeah, Kirkland Honda over here has something directly to do with the 1954 film Godzilla. Tough or bluff?
What? That's tough. I have something to do with the 1946 film Godzilla.
Yes.
I have something to do with that film.
Yes.
I'll say tough.
Bluff.
All right. The director for the movie was Ishiro Honda.
Or Honda, as we say.
Or
in the-
Honda.
Yeah.
So isn't he your cousin or something?
Yes, we're all related.
All Hondas are related.
All right.
Gripes.
Gripes
of wrath time.
Session.
Gripes of wrath.
Session.
Can you say that in Spanish?
What is a gripe in Spanish? It's I'd have to go and look up my dictionary because I don't remember what
All right, you're
gripe
just going to have
is.
to brush up.
All right. Speaking of the Spanish language, I have a gripe. Why don't other restaurants, besides Mexican restaurants, serve things like chips when you walk in? You know, they give you bread sometimes, and the bread's like, it's okay. When you walk into a Mexican restaurant, they give you a warm basket of tortilla. My mouth is watering just, and like 5 different salsas. Actually, Korean restaurants do this. Korean restaurants will give you a bunch of little kimchis and this sort of thing. This is probably like 30 cents to the restaurant. My mouth is still watering.
Yeah, I'm still watering.
This is probably like 30 cents, but it makes such a difference to the dining experience to have this immediate meal given to you for free. And incidentally, when we were in high school, me and my friends, we used to go to a Mexican restaurant and we'd sit down, they give it, and there'd be like 6 of us, right? And so we're totally cheap. This is back when we couldn't afford going to McDonald's. And we sit down, we'd have our chips and salsa, and then the waitress would come by and do, have you ordered? Oh, well, we're still looking at the menus. Can you bring some more chips? Bring more chips. And then the waitress come back and have you figured out what you want? And one of us would order like the cheapest thing on the menu. I feel kind of bad saying this right now. but then we would get this full meal essentially of chips without having to pay very
So
much.
they should be the ones griping.
Yeah.
Or as I say it in Spanish, las quejas de la furia.
Is that a lame gripe?
No, every gripe is...
Every gripe is holy.
All right. My gripe of the day, after discussing this annoyance with Kirk, I decided I'm going to share it. If anyone else can relate to this problem as a child, if you remember, nothing was more exciting than Saturday morning cartoons. And you'd be like, oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. I have nothing to do. Cartoons.
Yes.
But I remember the distinct feeling of like the ones I really, really, really wanted to watch were at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, that's not going to happen. Like, I don't even know if I knew how to wake up or had an alarm or just naturally woke up, but it was probably around 8. And I know the kick-ass shows that I would definitely want to see were at 6 a.m. And that pissed me off, and I still remember the feeling of like I never got to watch those shows. Damn it.
That's very frustrating.
Well, I'm gonna gripe on top of that gripe and say that when I was a kid, they didn't even have the Cartoon Network, they didn't have the Disney Channel, they didn't have Nickelodeon. So in order to even see cartoons, you had to wake up on Saturday morning, and then you only had like 1.5 hours of cartoons, and that was it.
You had to watch cartoons uphill both ways.
I knew knew you were gonna say that. I was gonna say that.
Oh, did I steal your?
In Colombia, did they have cartoons?
Well, we had U.S. cartoons.
Oh,
Yeah, but then I also watched them in New York when I was there. Yeah, I used to love Saturday morning, like the Flintstones and the Legion of Super Friends, and then what's his name, the Barbarian.
well, there was He-Man.
No. Of course, but He-Man came later.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about the. Why can't I
Wait.
think of this? Well, first of all, there was Plastic Man and Plastic Baby.
Plastic Man and Plastic Baby.
Plastic Man and Plastic Baby.
What is that?
Well, first there was Plastic Man, and then there was Plastic Man and Plastic Baby.
Weird.
Yeah.
What is that?
It was a show. It was awesome.
Was it Colombian?
DC Comics. No, Plastic Man, you know.
Oh, was it like a naked Ken doll and like a little baby?
Or was it like was he made out of like hefty bags or something?
No. You guys don't know.
was it like
Plastic Man?
stop motion where somebody was
The
like
DC Comics Plastic Man?
No.
He stretches.
Oh.
He's got the red shirt with the sunglasses.
Yeah.
And he had a baby, and it was Plastic Baby.
Yeah, he was the Fantastic Four counterpart.
Well, yes, for DC.
He was different from the
Yes.
stretchy guy?
Plastic Baby.
Yeah, Plastic Baby. Do you remember the stretch dolls? They would break, and then all the goo would fall out of the stretch doll.
No.
What? What is happening?
I don't know.
Late 70s.
What were
they
you
would sell-
doing to them? How did you puncture them? Don't tell me. Wait, don't tell me.
What? You would stretch their arms to the point of bursting.
That's mean.
No, but you weren't trying to do it. The toy wasn't that good.
All right, great.
Okay, but did you hear my Spanish? How I figured out how to say it. Gripe es queja, and wrath can be furia. So las quejas de la furia. That's
Session.
yeah. Okay, what am I gripe? Oh yeah. So my gripe. I'm sitting there in the movie theater, and they have these bright lights on the side of the theater so people can find their seats. You're like, well, it's no problem because surely these things are going to dim down when the movie starts. Except every now and then you're in the theater, and either because of malfunction or someone forgot to do their freaking job, the movie starts and there's some bright ass light coming out of the corner of your eye on the side of the damn wall. And so like you can't concentrate for the first 15 minutes of the movie.
That's never happened to me.
That's never happened to you. This happens to me all the time. And maybe I'm super sensitive to light.
What movie theater was this?
Well, it happens on the east side a lot. Maybe you don't come to the east side enough.
What, like Lincoln Square or what?
Not, maybe it did happen in Lincoln Square. Certainly happened at Crossroads. Oh, I don't want to name names. Crossroads, though.
Yeah. Well, Crossroads is sort of an old theater.
But they renovated it like 10 years ago or something.
I used to love that theater when I was younger because on Monday nights they would have matinee prices.
Oh, like $20.
Like $3, like back in the day. Back in the day.
Jesus. Do you remember? Oh,
I saw The Doors there, I remember.
The Doors.
The movie The Doors.
Oh, The Doors. Yeah.
Val
I
Kilmer.
like you watched The Doors.
All right. Well, that does it for another episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining us. Please take care of yourself, people.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Adios.
Vaya con Dios. That, by the way, is a
Dios
gripe
mío.
for the next episode. When they say Vaya con Dios in movies, it's total wrong pronunciation. I'll go into detail.
It's total wrong pronunciation.
It's a total wrong pronunciation. Bastardo.
All right.
Es muy mal.